Witchtok Podcast.
Our speakers would first like to introduce themselves before the podcast will begin.
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm 18 from the US and I'm a crystal witch.
I'm Jim Two Snakes. I am a shamanic practitioner from southern Michigan in the United States.
Hi, I'm Jojo. I am originally from the US, living in the UK, and I'm an eclectic witch practicing just under a year.
Hi, my name is Lily. I am 27 years old from the Netherlands, and I'm still trying to figure out what kind of witch I want to be, because I've just started about 2 months ago.
For everyone here, we have a special guest. We got Jim Two Snakes on with us. Many of you may know him from the TikToks that he's got. He's got his own podcast as well, around Grandfather Fire. And he is one of the elders that are on our Witchtok Discord. So, Jim, thank you so much for being here with us.
Glad to do it.
We were looking at deity work. So this is something that's been a hot topic with a lot of new witches, a lot of new practicing kids that have come into this. So I know that you've done an awesome series on TikTok, your spiritual accounting series, which outlines so many different points about patron deities versus devotional, admirational practices, and about spirits themselves. So what would be some tips for any newbies that are thinking about doing deity worship?
So the thing I think people need to understand, especially when they're beginning, is that they don't need to start with deity work. That's a big one, because a platform like TikTok, you're getting a lot of people that are talking about their deities and their deity work all the time. And I think it creates a sort of a pressure that people need to figure out who my deity is, and I need to hurry up and begin working with them. And there really isn't that sort of rush. As with so many things, you start with your research, and you're going to start with what you feel inclined towards. If you've always had a fascination with Poseidon or with Persephone or with, any sort of deity, then that's where you start at. Start by doing the research and reading their stories and their mythologies, and that's really the beginning point.
That's perfect. And one of the things that you were the one that actually said it best was on the TikTok, on the Witchtok Discord. You said that deity work, it was like standing under a waterfall because you were thirsty, and it resonates so well, just because there is so much information, and because we know that some of these deities do demand a lot. They may demand a lot of sacrifice or work to actually worship them or do the practice correctly.
Yeah, and the hard part is, so deity work is like any other sort of relationship, which means it's going to be different for different people. And some people have a hardwiring, I'm going to call it, for working with spirit and being open to spiritual communication. And although that might go really well for them, it can also mean that deity just steps in a really hard way. One of my friends talks about having Odin rewire his brain, and that essentially meant that for a while his entire life fell apart as he tried to learn with things. And yet someone else working with the same deity might just have a very casual, a gentle guidance sort of relationship. So I think maybe that's a hard thing to understand to people, is that not all relationships are going to look the same. And kind of when you open that door, you're not sure what you're going to get.
I've also had a thing that I talked about with the practical pagan, Shell, who cannot be here today. She's not quite well yet. But she's also told me that beginning witches are basically like a flashlight in a dark room for certain deities, but also to other entities. And that being a new witch attracts all sorts of things. And there's a lot of witches on TikTok saying like, oh, and this happened to me, and I think it's, I'm gonna say Loki or whoever, what deity it is. I think they're contacting me. Just know that it's not necessarily who you think it is, and always thoroughly check before you go into a relationship with the being that is trying to connect with you, because if you don't know for certain, and if you're starting out as a witch, it's very hard to determine, okay, is this really Loki, or is this
Right. It's super hard.
yeah, some sort of entity. And that's also why elders are so important, and people who can check this stuff for you to see, okay, is it really what I think it is? Because I've also talked to people in the Discord who like said stuff, and then they got a tarot reading, and it turned out to be something not quite as friendly as as a deity.
Right.
So
That
I'm
was
just
me.
there's also a caution. It's not, we're saying like don't do it, but do your research before you start to do it. It's with anything. Research
Right.
what you're doing, and don't just jump into it, because there may be some things out there that you don't want to connect with.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's kind of what I said in that spiritual accounting series, and there's a couple different things to look at. And first of all is that spirits lie. They absolutely do. And there are lots of things that will pretend to be something else because it gets them attention. They want your attention. That's the flashlight in a dark room scenario. And even with deity, um, they sometimes, they see that flashlight go on. And here's the thing about deity, they don't understand time the same way we do, right? So they see that flashlight go on and they're like, oh, you're ready to do the thing now. Well, they might be thinking of the you that's 20 or 30 years down the road, more experienced. They might throw you right into the deep end because they don't comprehend that you're just beginning. So you have to kind of set some boundaries there. That's an important thing. And yeah, verification. If I met a brand new person on the street and they told me that they were an undercover police agent, yeah, should I just believe them because they said it, or should I verify? Should I check? Should I be? You know what I mean? You can't just assume that something's telling you the truth, or even that you're hearing it correctly. That's another big issue. The reason that I set up the spiritual accounting process is because there's a lot of times where you might receiving a message, yes, it might even be coming from who you think it is, yes, but you might be interpreting the message incorrectly. They might be trying to get you a completely different message than what you're hearing. So that's another thing that has to be checked.
Yeah, and I think it's a good idea that we post a link to your spiritual accounting in the description below. And I think you've made like a compilation video on YouTube about that.
I'm working on a smash cut that I'll be putting up probably later on today. Today being
Okay.
Sunday. So
Okay, yeah. Then when this video comes out, it will most likely be in the description down below, because I think that's a
yeah,
good idea
yeah.
for all beginning witches to watch, and if you want to go into deity work, to look into that.
Yeah, and the genesis, so people know the genesis of the spiritual accounting. I've been doing this around my local community for a number of years, and so this is conversations that I've had with all kinds of different spiritual practitioners, from beginners all the way up to more experienced. I've talked to voodoo priests, chaos magicians, other people on shamanic paths like I am, traditional British witchcraft, all of it. And then when my wife and I had a small occult shop, and so I had to come up with a way of explaining this to people that were coming up to the counter. And so this is something that the local community in my area has adopted. Most of your more experienced practitioners around my area will have heard of spiritual accounting, and we all practice some sort of variation of it.
So it really does take into perspective, just because with TikTok, we know that the platform is limited, 60
Mhm.
seconds max. And
Yep.
you cannot see the work and research that people are doing in the backgrounds, those that are, maybe have been doing their deity work, doing their research, doing their practice for years.
Mhm.
But when you see it, it cuts it out. Like when I first started, how I actually got into my practice was that I saw a TikTok video of people saying, "Oh, this is my patron deity," and I wanted to know what that was. I looked online. I was like, "Where's the test to find your patron deity?" Like it was some sort of Hogwarts class. And it was when I actually had my first lucid dream in years that night, and I had yelled out, "Who's my patron deity?"
Mhm.
And I got a response that was very baffling and confusing, but also kickstarted me onto this path. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, let's research because I was so confused by the answer. So it really does hide away how much goes into it with the research. And that is so funny because Shell talks about this all the time on her TikTok, but research is everything. Like if you want to try this product, I mean, how many books do you have on, I'm guessing from your research, Jim? I'm scared to kind of ask that.
I couldn't even tell you anymore. I mean, they're at the point where they're spilling out into my shed, so I have no idea.
Yeah, there you go. And you never, I'm guessing you never stop, do you?
No. And the thing that I've really been able to enjoy, the thing that I really love about TikTok and social media in general, YouTube, that sort of thing, is I've now been able to have a lot of one-on-one conversations with these authors. Instead of just reading their book, I can really pick their brain, which is fascinating.
Oh, that's great. And then obviously with what you've read and with your own experience, I'm sure you're able to get a lot more from it too, rather than just having to sit there and reflect on what they've put down previously.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like, the patron deities, that's a great example because, not everybody is going to have one. That's a very specific relationship to have with deity. And a lot of people don't realize that, patron in the conventional English sense means boss. And so that is one god or goddess, or maybe a couple of them if you're really, we can decide whether that's fortunate or unfortunate, but they're really going to boss you around. They are going to really rule a good chunk of your life, and not everybody's going to have that sort of relationship with deity. So you might have a really good relationship, but it might not necessarily be a patron deity. They're not required by any sense of the word.
Yeah, because we've also seen ancestral work, which is not necessarily a deity, I believe, or I don't know how you would describe it.
Right. I love ancestor work as a way for people to begin. I really do. And there's a couple different reasons for that. And this applies, when I say ancestors, a lot of people jump to like their parents and their grandparents, which is great. But we're really talking about the ancestors that go back really to the dawn of time. So this is a really long chain, and we all have really powerful ancestors. But I love people starting with ancestor work because it's something very grounded. It's very down to earth. The ancestors have a lot of concern with you as a member of their bloodline or their family. It doesn't even have to be blood. There's adoptions and there's other things as well. But they've got a vested interest in you. They want to see you do well. They want to see you do well in school. They want to see you have a good house. They want to see you, have good meals and be successful. So there's a lot of practicality there with the ancestors. And they're a great way to develop those skills of spirit communication, of figuring out, am I hearing things right? Is this a sock puppet or something internal from myself? And they're a great training ground for that. Plus, like I said, they're really practical. Once again, we're back to the concept of deities not quite understanding time and sometimes the material world well. If I'm to ask Horus for some help with getting my rent paid, he might get back to me in 10 or 20 years. Where the ancestors kind of know how important this is, and they'll find opportunities for you to make a little bit more money or whatever in a lot quicker way.
Yeah, just a windfall or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's not what we expect it to be. This goes for deity work or ancestor work.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm asking for help with rent, that doesn't mean money's going to fall out of the sky. What it's going to mean is somebody says, hey, do you want to make an extra $50 helping me clean out my garage? Yeah, great, cool, I'll be right there.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's a lot more practical than people think it is.
Yeah. And if someone were to go into deity work, you talk a lot about meditation and knowing yourself.
Yeah.
How would you start out with that? Because there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I cannot sit still for an hour. Like
Neither can I. Good luck with that. So the thing about meditation, there's a very good Buddhist monk that I talked to quite a bit, a couple of interviews, and we talked about meditation. Meditation essentially is just trying to slow down your mind, slow down that monkey mind, the constant distraction, so you can know yourself.
The instant gratification
exactly.
monkey.
Exactly. And the key with meditation isn't for me anyway, I can't speak universally. I'll tell you my experience. It doesn't have to be about a length of time. It does not have to be an hour. It does not have to be all day or, anything like that. The key for meditation to me is consistency. So I might only be able to do, in 10 minutes for meditation can be quite a challenge sometimes. But if I can do 10 minutes consistently for a month or 2 months, you know what that meditative mind feels like. And it also doesn't have to be completely a blank mind scenario. It's okay if thoughts pop into your head. The important thing to know is that when a thought pops into your head, acknowledge it. Oh, it's very interesting. I'm thinking about the color red. Set it aside and come back to it when you're not meditating. And that way you can see, why was red important? Is that something I need to pay attention to? Or is it just, one of those scattered thoughts? But acknowledge it, set it aside. But don't beat yourself up over it. Usually I spend about 10 minutes, like I said, is a good amount of time thinking. I just try to pay attention to my breath. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. And just try as much as you can to make your focus just on your breath. Over time and consistency, what you're going to do is start eliminating all those stray little thoughts coming in. That's when you really get down into knowing what your emotional state is and what is or is not bothering you.
Yeah, I've noticed this because I've started talk down meditations, talk down meditations for sleep, because I couldn't sleep like on my own. It was very hard for me, so I was taking like melatonin tablets, which was like a not prescribed medication, because like if you have like life-saving meditations, just don't like stop or anything with magic. That's just one thing I'd like to say. But this was
Right.
something that I got from the drugstore to help myself sleep, because I noticed that I couldn't sleep. But I now started talk down meditations, and I noticed that I sleep within 20 minutes just because I listened to this person telling me how to meditate, and telling me, yeah, it's okay if your mind wanders, but just acknowledge what you said, acknowledge what is being what you think of, and then go back to your breath, or go back to whatever. And it just is also a very good way to like start out. And yeah, falling asleep is not the idealist of things, because you talk a lot about writing down stuff and journaling. But for me, it was a good way to start out with this, because right now I don't have to use the medication anymore, which is a bonus.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
A little. Do you have a second? I want to tell a funny story about meditation.
Oh, sure.
This is a great one, because you mentioned both meditation and medication there, and I think this is a really important thing to talk about. That a lot of the practices that we're doing as witches, including meditation or anything else, they are not a replacement for medication.
Definitely not.
And the cute story is, there was a person I know of who studied with someone who closely studied with the Dalai Lama himself. So this is someone that knows meditation. They have worked intimately with the Dalai Lama. And the person I know was bemoaning the fact that I've still got to take antidepressants and maybe I'm just not as good at this. And the person that worked with the Dalai Lama told him, I've been meditating and doing this work for several decades. I still take an antidepressant. If anybody could meditate their way out of it, I could have.
Yeah.
So I think that was really fabulous. It's like an affirmation that, a lot of these, especially the medications, the body has certain chemicals and certain reactions and certain things that go on. And there is not a failure on you. It's not that you're not spiritual enough if you need these things. You just need them.
Yeah, definitely. And I love a saying, because I think that I've heard you say it or someone else, that witchcraft is always an add-on to medication that you might already have. It's never a solution. And I think that is a very important thing to say.
Yeah, and there are things you can do to emphasize that too. I think I mentioned in the TikTok, one of the chats, that You can pray over your medication. You can do energy work on your medication. You can do energy work on the water that you use to take your medication, and with the intent that that spiritual practice will make the medication more effective and benefit you more. And that's a perfectly acceptable way of blending those two things.
Going back to deities and stuff, I have noticed with a bunch of people on TikTok that there are a lot of people that say something like, and I don't mean to like down talk any of them, but because I am a very skeptical person, I always look at those videos skeptically, where they're like, oh yeah, I'm listening to 3 Days Grace, whatever it is, and my deity's totally vibing, see his candle moving, and I'm what is your thought on that? Because there's a lot of people who say like, yeah, my deity's totally like hanging out with me and stuff like that. What is your stance on that? Because to me, I'm skeptical.
Possible. I mean, because I know that a lot of deities respond to certain types of music and certain stimuli, and that's a good way to get energetically in tune with them. The thing that you always have to ask yourself is, what is it serving? If you're using the music and the candle as an offering and you're really trying to get close to them, then that's great. If you're using it to kind of look how cool I am, I'm going to make a TikTok about it, then you got to start to question your own motivation, because was it really for the deity or was it for you? That's an important thing to look at. I mean, I can't say that any of that stuff is impossible. I've had some weird things happen over the years, but you always have to ask yourself what the motivation is and why you're doing something. You know, does that make sense? Is that a good answer?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I just don't want to take over the whole conversation with you, so I want to give the others a chance to talk to you as well.
Well, I could probably jump us into the next little bit. So the differences between, this is another one from TikTok that we've seen people talking about how the deities are their husbands or wives versus actual god spouses, because we know those are a thing as well. But the manner that we've seen it on TikTok is, I just gave my hubby, I don't know, Odin, my hubby Odin has just come down and watched, I don't know, Thor with me. So I've seen quite a few of these on TikTok, and just kind of wanted to pick your brain on the differences between the two, and what consequences could be, or possibly just why are these so starkly different?
Yeah, that's really hard, isn't it? Because once again, we get into the territory of everybody's relationship is a little bit different. God spouses are amazing because they have a huge amount of dedication, right? They are essentially the pagan or witch equivalent of a nun. They are dedicating their lives to being, because that's how nuns are spoke of, that they're married to the Lord, and that's the same thing that you're doing as a god spouse. The dedication level is huge. And so for the god spouses that I know, that means just huge and elaborate amounts of work, both personally and doing things for that deity, whether it be a massive meal or an altar, or a lot of times restrictions get involved here because deities won't want you to have certain things. You might be restricted from certain types of food or certain types, wearing certain colors, and there's all kinds of things that get involved with it. When you get down to the level of Odin was hanging out on the couch with me watching a Thor movie, then once again, I cannot rule it out because I'm not Odin, but at the same point in time, I have to start wondering things about, there are two phrases: sock puppeting, which is when you're internal desires are manifesting themselves and trying to say that there's something like your internal desires and imagination will say, I'm a deity or I am the spirit and this is what I want you to do. And strangely enough, the things that they tell you are often things that you wanted to do anyway. And the other one would be God phoning. And God phoning is a phrase for people who are in constant communication with deity. And the problem is once again, it runs into that territory of that wasn't really that deity at all. That was you and what you desired and what you wanted to do. And deity work, until you've been doing it a really long time, um, and you really start to get a feel for it, there should be places that you're doing your deity work. If it's not in front of your altar and or your shrine, and those are established places for this is where I'm doing deity work, it shouldn't be getting messages all over the place. You shouldn't be in constant contact because that's not only unhealthy for you because it's not setting boundaries, but it also leads to questions about what you're really communicating with or whether it's a sock puppet or a God phone situation.
Or
I don't
something
know.
else entirely that you don't want in your life.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And it doesn't have to be a shrine or an altar. One of the things I talked about is it can definitely be a piece of jewelry. It could be a hat. A lot of times you see me wearing hats in my photos, and because a hat has become an important part of my practice, it's kind of a way of signifying that I'm in sacred space when I'm on the move. But at the same point in time, if you don't have any sort of boundaries, chances are you're talking to yourself rather than something external.
That's perfect. And for anyone listening, I mean, this is no way trying to do anything sort of gatekeeping. This is just more to identify what kind of boundaries you could be looking at or what to expect when you do enter into something like this, because there is a difference. And it's just so that you are aware when you start doing your research and do want to partake in any type of deity work or worship
Yeah.
in this.
Yeah, definitely. And because there's a couple different things also as well that maybe would be handy to speak about, which is um, unverified personal gnosis, or UPG, which is something that happens to people when they're working with deity, where a deity might tell you that they want you to do a certain thing. And so the example I use with the over the age limit crowd is there's a whiskey called Fireball whiskey, and it's like Loki likes Fireball whiskey on his altar or shrine for offerings, and that's an unverified personal gnosis. That is something that came to me, and then really I could either take this from the route of, well, it doesn't harm anybody, and so I'm going to do some verifications on it, maybe get a reading on it. Everything seems pretty up and up that this is an okay thing, so I'm going to start using that as an offering. Then you'll get into territories where other people, so when I start talking to other people that might be working with Loki and they're from other parts of the world and I don't normally have contact with them, and they're saying yes, he absolutely does like that type of whiskey, then it starts getting more verifiable. That starts getting into the territory of almost new mythology. Like, it's not as good as the old lore, but there is something to it because enough people have experienced it. I don't know if that's making sense at all.
Oh,
So
definitely.
And with deity work, so maybe if enough people are saying I've had the experience that Odin likes this certain song or this certain movie playing in the background while I'm sitting at my shrine has this sort of Odinish vibe. If there's enough people that are saying that same thing and all the readings are clear, the tarot readings and everything are clear that it really is Odin, people that are working with Odin for a long period of time say, yes, this is Odin, then maybe there's something there. I definitely can't gatekeep everybody's experience. I'm kind of more of the rock climbing analogy. I want to make sure that you've got a good foundation, some good footing, and a good grip before you go climbing off on your own.
This is why I love you on TikTok. You have the best analogies and best ways to make it either visual or very easy to understand certain aspects. Like your pyramid of diagnosis, that was a really
Yes.
good visual representation of how to go about feeling a darker presence in your
Mm-hmm.
area, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out, okay, is it physical, is it mental, is it something completely different to the norm, and just I've used it since you put that up, so I was like, okay, this is useful, thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
the
you.
thing.
Thank you.
That's a thing. I have written it in my Book of Shadows, just because sometimes in your life you do something, you experience something, and it just doesn't make sense, or there's something weird about it,
Yeah.
and you just want to know, okay, why is this happening to me? Is there some unearthly reason why this is happening, or is it just bad luck?
Or
And
your
Yeah.
creepy
Yep.
neighbor.
or your creepy
Yeah,
neighbor.
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, blessed water isn't going to get rid of the creepy neighbor, but
Hmm.
Well, there's in that pyramid of diagnosis, and even a few times already this conversation, you've heard me speak to getting a reading on something.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, if you go back to ancient times, there are few things as valuable as a good reader, a tarot reader, a card reader, dice reading, some sort of divination. Um, and you have to be able to get readings from somebody outside of yourself, because that helps eliminate your own biases and wanting to read into it the answer that you really want. And a good reader will absolutely save your behind. And
Hmm.
that pyramid of diagnosis is a good example, because a reader that wants to tell you what you want to hear because they want to collect your money or be your friend or whatever, they're going to absolutely say, oh gosh, yes, it is completely a dark spirit, a dark entity in your house. Where a good and ethical reader who's really experienced in their work, it might be just as inclined to say to you, yeah, according to the cards, maybe you should go talk to your general practitioner, because I think there's something else going on.
Yeah.
Maybe you should go, consult someone who's an expert in the heating and air conditioning system, because I think that might be behind it. They're going to be absolutely honest with you when they think it's not something spiritual as well.
Hmm. And that's definitely a good thing to have. It's
Mhm.
also because there's a lot of lone practitioners,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of lone. I'm not gonna call them lone wolves, but yeah, like lone practitioners on TikTok that, yeah, don't have anyone to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
That is also why TikTok is such a good platform for it. It's like you can go to one of the more experienced practitioners and say like, hey, can you help me with this? And a lot of them are gladly happy to do so. And I've also discovered it in the Discord that we're in and that we met in, because yeah, your Jim is also part of the Discord that the Practical Pagan has set up, to which this podcast is derived. There are people there who are willing to do readings for you. There's even like a special text channel that you can like ask for, hey, I need a reading, can
Mm-hmm.
someone give it to me? It's a very open thing and very organic that people can get into, which is a lovely thing to have, because it gives like you said, an unbiased view on things, which
Right.
is very good.
And don't hesitate either. Like, I know a lot of people, you might have trouble paying for a reading. You might not have the finances, or you
Mm-hmm.
might not know who to ask or whatever. Go ahead and feel free to get multiple readings and let them verify each other as much as possible. The thing that I think is key there, a lot of times with readings, is to, if you're going to use a reading to verify a reading, try to make the reader have a blind reading. If that, so your first reader might have said, yes, absolutely, that is indeed the spirit of Jupiter that's trying to contact you. And so um, when you go to that second reader, instead of saying, here's what happened, is it Jupiter, just go to that second reader and say, was the first reader correct? Or something happened. Can you verify that it is what I think it is? Don't give them a huge amount of insight. And so then they're going to turn up, they might turn up the uh, king of king of wands or something like that, and they go, oh, there's a big powerful presence that sits on a throne. Well, yeah, that'd be Jupiter. Okay, cool, that's a confirmation.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to check one against the other. I'm also going to go ahead and say that I am kind of biased against pendulums, and I think a lot of it is because pendulums are pretty things and they are absolutely gorgeous, but the
Prone
readers that
for
I know,
prone for human
yeah,
human
exactly. The readers that
interpretation.
I know, even the ones that are willing to say, okay, so it's a catch-22, right? You can say, I put my pendulum in a jar on a shelf, so there's no way I could influence it. Well, my counter argument to that would be, oh, so you're saying magic and energy aren't real. Because if you're going to go under the assumption that magic and energy are real and they can change the world, you absolutely could influence that pendulum, even though it's on a jar on a shelf. So I'm not convinced about the reliability. There's a reader that I know, Aldrin Summit, and he's absolutely amazing. He's been doing this for a lot of years, and even he said that he had to essentially strip his psyche down to the core to eliminate all kinds of biases before he could even start to get remotely accurate pendulum readings. It's just one of those things where it's just too prone to your own influence.
Oh, it's so easy to change the directions on those things. Like, it doesn't look like your hand is moving, but you can change it, and I've done that myself.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that is the point with a pendulum, don't get me wrong, because any divination tool is just a tool for you to be more in contact with your subconscious. So absolutely, the point is that even though you're trying to be still, you can influence that pendulum. But use the pendulum for things like finding your lost car keys or helping you decide what direction or what part of a room an important piece of furniture, your shrine or something should fit in. Something where the fact that it's your subconscious that's influencing that pendulum works in your favor instead of against you.
So, recently, now this is an actual personal question of mine. So, I recently made an offering to Dionysus, and I want to know what divination tool would be good to use to figure out if Dionysus liked that specific offering.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess the question is, let's start with your gut feeling. How do you feel about it?
I think he liked it.
Would it be too personal to ask roughly what type of offering it was?
It was wine.
Oh, well, gee, that'd be terrible. I can't imagine that he'd like that.
I was about to say, I did my research. Like, I know he likes wine.
Yeah, I think any time that you've got an offering that is congruous with the established lore, you're probably doing pretty well. The only thing I would worry about, I don't even know if you would need a reading for that, unless you're trying to do some sort of specific work or open up some sort of specific communication for an answer. I think you're sticking with pretty much what is accepted lore for offerings for Dionysus, so I think you're pretty safe without a reading on that one, actually.
Oh, okay, awesome.
And jumping in on that, I have also seen a lot of people on TikTok like lighting candles for certain deities and stuff, and I've also seen a lot of people who immediately get intensely scared when something goes wrong with their offering, because I've seen people who for instance, didn't trim their wick on their candles, and the glass broke because it got too hot. The dish that the candle was standing on got too hot and it broke. That's something that happened in this Discord.
It split. I know who exactly you're talking about. It split literally in half.
Yeah, and I asked them, is it a dish that was heat resistant? And they said, oh no, it wasn't. So I said, that is also a thing that you should be aware of when you do an offering of some sort or a spell of some sort in any ways. Make sure that you do that responsibly without fire hazard, because a lot of people use candles.
Mhm.
Trim your wick. There's always a possibility that the wax goes down slower than the wick. Cut the wick down again if it needs to be safer. Make sure that you use heat resistant
Yep.
dishware. Just
Right. I think we're, in a way, we're back to that pyramidal diagnostics thing.
exactly,
Like,
yeah.
if the dish broke, then you got to first look for all the physical things that could have happened, and then if it repeats, if something else happens that you think might be connected, that's when you'd start thinking, well, maybe I need to get a reading on this. Maybe I need to look into stuff a little bit better. Oh, I know something really important I need to talk about, though.
Ooh.
Just came to me.
Please do tell.
Yeah, this is something. So I'm going to use the spirit helpers analogy that whenever somebody has an animal spirit helper, it's usually like wolf or bear or one of these couple ones that's always really common. Same thing tends to happen with deity work. A lot of times you're going to see people that are really quick to jump to, say Odin or Anubis or, one of these other very popular deities.
Because that's
The
what they
thing
are,
that,
popular.
yeah, and that's the thing that you have to understand. There's two things that could be happening there. It could be that they are the ones that are reaching out to you because they're the ones that you know, but that might not be the deity that you end up spending a lot of time with. There's been a joke amongst a few of our friends that the Kemetic gods, the Egyptian gods, are gateway gods, and that when they show up, a lot of times it's not even them necessarily that you end up working with on a longer basis, but they need to show you somebody else. But there's, in a very, if you're doing your Google research, you're never going to pop up with the goddess of the fields sort of thing. You're always going to come up with something that's more popular first. And so they can kind of act as a gateway. The other thing is, and this comes back to that patron deity conversation, a patron will be with you pretty much your entire life, where it is not uncommon at all for gods to come into your life and be really important for a certain period of time while you learn certain life lessons and meet certain accomplishments, and in turn do certain things for them, and then they move on. Then you might end up working with another spirit or deity instead. So
you're not
sometimes
you're not set for life if you don't want it to be, or if it's not
yeah,
necessary to you.
Not necessarily. No, you're not set for life. And even along those lines, like we'll go back to the example of Loki, because as I said, I have a shrine for Loki. Loki's not a deity that I work with or spend a lot of time with, but I have a worship for Loki because Loki is part of that Norse pantheon that I do have some involvement with. And so it's proper for me to acknowledge Loki, to set out offerings, to have him as part of my worship practice, but not necessarily do anything more than that. That's completely appropriate as well. So you might get a message from a deity that says, I just want a shrine. I want some offerings. No one's giving me enough offerings. I am the goddess and the Romans had a god of the sewer system, so I'll use that. I am the god of the sewer systems, and you live in a big city, and no one's giving me enough attention, and damn it, I need some attention. So you might be tasked with just setting up a shrine for that god, and that's it. That's the whole deal.
That's awesome. And there's also a difference between worshipping a deity and working with a deity.
Yeah, we had a big conversation about that on my podcast, and there was a couple different conclusions that we came to. Like, working with really does imply that it's a two-way street, almost like a job situation. You're doing something for them, they're doing something for you. Where worship might be just, I love and adore you. The other factor that was in there that kind of came to the surface when we were talking about it is, and I think this is a big part of what's going on in modern paganism and witchcraft, is because a lot of people are coming from a Christian background, they have damage around the word worship. Worship is, to them, brings with it all the baggage of Christianity and
All the
probably
rules
some
that were
really
set.
exactly.
Yeah.
Where if you look at the core of the word worship, it just means that you love and adore something to a huge degree, and so that's important to know that it is okay to worship. That's a perfectly acceptable word.
Mm-hmm. And it's also important to note that, yes, we're talking about deities in this episode, but know that being a witch does not mean that you have to have a deity. You can be a witch and have no deities. I have been brought up as an atheist. My parents were both baptized, but they decided that they wanted their kids to make their own choices about this. So I was never baptized and never brought up in the Christian beliefs. I mean, I know of it, but I don't practice it. So I'm very skeptical in looking into all these deities, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to read about them, see if I find a connection. I'm open to anything, but at the moment I'm a witch, but I don't have deities to worship, and that's and that's okay.
It's perfectly acceptable. The thing with deities is paganism is is more the religious aspect of it, where witchcraft is a craft. It's the skill and use of energy and applied energy. So
and it also
they're
comes
different
from
things.
the ancient term of wise woman. The woman in the cottage on the fields that helps with medicine, and that is where the term witch comes from.
Exactly. So you don't need to be. Yeah, you, like you said, you absolutely don't have to work with deity at all.
Yeah, and you can also be a Christian and be a witch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what Jojo knows a little more about.
There's actually there's someone on TikTok she practices witchcraft and also is an ordained minister. So I think that one I want to probably bug her about sometime. But I come from a very heavy Christian background. I was raised, I knew the church inside and out. I knew the different Bible stories. And coming over to witchcraft, actually, someone from your podcast, Saranth, I checked out his WordPress because he actually he had some articles from 2011. That sounds creepy, going back that far into his articles. Because I found that he had discussions on the going from Christian to paganism, which I found incredibly helpful, because one of the big things is coming from such a heavy religion like Christianity is the fear that they have pressed down on you from a young age. Like, if you deviate anywhere from the Christian faith, you are doomed to eternal hell, essentially. And that was a huge barrier for me when I started into the craft, and I was so apprehensive. But I might actually see if I can link that in there. It's got some great release methods as well for that. But yeah, it just coming from that side where I had that heavy religion and switching it to this one. And it's been an absolute journey getting there.
Yeah, sometimes these things they circle around too. Saranth is a great example of, he was raised Roman Catholic, but now he's Saranth Odin's son. That tells you exactly everything you need to know about his practice. But at the same point in time, at almost any given time, you can find him with a crucifix or a rosary or something like that, because his family, and so thus a portion of his ancestors, were Catholic. And he doesn't want to fight them. He wants to honor them. So sometimes his Catholic ancestors, they'll ask him to read a passage from the Bible, or they'll ask him to, count the rosary. Where he draws the line, where he's found balance, is like when there's prayers that say that there is only one God, he won't recite those because that's not his belief. But at a certain point in time, if you work on this, you can come to a point where it's not a fight within you anymore about Christianity or your Christian upbringing or even with your Christian family. It just is what it is.
for anyone listening, I mean, I would definitely check out the podcast that Jim's on, which is around grandfather fire. I actually did listen to the worship versus working with what's the other one versus
It was worship versus working with versus boy, now I have to
starts with a
think
V,
about
I think.
it. Yeah, veneration.
Because I loved that one because it was the three of you chat. I think it was just three of you on there chatting about it.
Yeah.
But
A lot of times we
mod-
have guests on, but yeah, that one was just the three of us just riffing away on it. So
That's good. We'll definitely put a link of that in the description because that's always worth listening to.
All right. Hello, everyone. So, it's only going to be the forecast for, this week since, we just had a terrific conversation about, working with deities and worshiping deities and kind of in the mix of between everything else. And so it's just going to be the forecast this week. Before I continue, for all of my just remember to delete that part, Lily. For all of my novice witches, all of these days that I'm about to mention are great days to get yourselves some moon water. You best do it. Going back to June, real quick, I just want to, kind of pop off the full moon and the new moon of June, and the full moon is going to be June 5th. The new moon is June 21st. For July, and I don't think I've ever seen this before, but for those who are American, the full moon is Independence Day, 4th of July. And for those who are not American, 4th of July. And mind you, this follows June 28th's last quarter. So if you want to strengthen your moon water that you made on the last quarter, you can do it on the 4th of July while us Americans are popping off fireworks. July 12th is that last quarter, and the new moon for July is going to be July 20th, and that exactly a week right after that is the first quarter on the 27th of July. That is it for the astro forecast with Jake. I'm sorry there was no news. I'm sorry there's no tips, but just so much information about deities that you all should write in your book of shadows.
And on that note, we will end this podcast here. I would love to see you guys in the next one. And remember, keep writing in your book of shadows, keep researching, keep reading, keep asking questions. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye!
bye.
Thanks for listening to the Witchtok Podcast. If you enjoyed, press the like button and leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to be kept up to date with new episodes.